never know if it could change your life. Take a chance, you're neither wrong or right. You never know if you don't roll them dice. You better roll them dice. You never know if it'll change your life.
Good afternoon, Matt.
Howdy, Rob.
Happy Dragon Days to you. These are the high dragon days of summer. We are in
lots
deep,
of Dragon Raid points. Low DPS.
DKP is happening here. Yeah.
No DKP down.
No minuses. All DKP plus this month. Lots of dragon talk. Lots of dragon news. This is Dungeon Master of None.
I'm Dungeon Master Matt.
And I'm Dungeon Master Rob. And of course, we have a lot of Dungeons and Dragons related news to discuss. New books, new things. Matt, what do we got going on?
Yeah, we basically got half the slate of, I think, or most of the slate of new books for the next year announced at D&D Live.
That's right.
So
D&D Live was 2 days ago, yesterday.
Yeah.
Wherein much was revealed. 2 new books that we know for sure about.
Right.
And
we have Strixhaven, A Curriculum of Chaos, which is another Magic the Gathering D&D crossover. Could be, I'm going to say, okay, here's my thoughts on this one. Could be the best one we've had of these, or it could fall flat. I think the ceiling is high for this one.
It is a wizarding school in the MTG lore, so maybe that's exciting to you, maybe it's not. There's potential there, I suppose.
We should do an episode about, like, world building magical universities or something like that, because this is kind of a fun idea. It would be fun to get our ideas out there before we see what Wizards. We
probably should, and given that we spent so much time discussing the Adventure Zone graduation and how pervasive old Harrius Potterus is, we ought to discuss the mystical boarding school magical university concept in greater detail, if at all possible. So yeah, we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that. So Strixhaven, I also, I have always been a MTG crossover hater.
Yeah.
But I am willing to be persuaded here. I am not preemptively choosing to dislike this. So we'll see. We'll see how it turns out. I'm willing to be persuaded here.
Yeah, me too. One of our listeners, and shout out to them, sort of mentioned that, they work at a friendly local gaming store, and that, they actually see, maybe, at least anecdotally, lots of Magic the Gathering players buying D&D stuff because of this. Well, so shout out to Sawyer for that on the ground reporting. Thank you.
And this was a question I had in a previous episode, which we don't have any way of knowing until Wizards tells us. But I wonder what the crossover is like how much this is boosting sales of one or the other. We all know that the MTG player base is substantially larger than the Dungeons and Dragons player base. So the cross-pollination value is, well, who knows? Clearly benefits D&D more, I think. But if it's getting new players in, then I say all the better.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
I personally don't have a ton of interest in this, but there was some cool stuff in Ravnica. I didn't hate Ravnica. It just wasn't really my thing. And I liked the Mystic Odysseys of Theros
more.
Again, a lot of that was not really what I was looking for, but there was some stuff I liked. So Strixhaven, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I like I said, the ceiling's high. If there's a lot of info about, like, running games in a magical university or using that as a plot hook, this could be a really quality book. I am disappointed. They did say, I think James Wyatt is maybe working on this one, which return of James Wyatt to D&D from working on Magic the Gathering for years, that they are axing all of those fun subclasses that were cross-class subclasses that could be taken by a number of classes. a little disappointed they didn't try harder to make that work. But as we sort of said, it's really hard to make it work. But I don't know. I would have been nice.
Turns out the response to the playtest response to those classes was not great. So that's too bad, but we'll see.
I mean, my response was, it's kind of great in that it's blurring the lines between the classes where you just sort of build your character and the class matters less, right? It's just a set of mechanics, and really you are what you describe at the table. So, you know, the difference between a sorcerer and wizard of the same subclass, not a lot. But anyway,
I thought there was potential.
All gone now.
I thought they were interesting. Maybe they'll come back in another form. But yeah, that's not happening now. But that's all right. Still could be some good stuff in Strixhaven. We'll see what comes out of it.
What other news we got?
New book is Fizban's Treasury of Dragons. And Matt
D&D returns with their just very awkward titling of books, you know?
Yeah.
A Treasury of Dragons. Is that the collective noun for dragons? Maybe. I don't know. Also, hey, it's Fizban from Dragonlance.
Fizban. You love Fizban. Fizban. You know.
Who's your favorite Deus Ex Machina character?
So this is going to be a bestiary of sorts, some kind of setting. It's not exactly a setting book, but it is setting us up for a return to Dragonlance. Looks like maybe.
Well, so we've gotten books like, for example, Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes and Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. 2 characters from Greyhawk. We're probably never getting a Greyhawk book, so it's entirely possible to have Fizban as a character.
Excellent point. Fizban can appear, and that does not mean we are getting a Dragonlance setting. That's a good point. Maybe just borrowing things from Dragonlance to be used in the general setting.
And we may have to do a deep dive into this someday, but this book, how it's described, reminds me of one of my favorite source books, the Dracononomicon from 3rd edition, which is all about the ecology, layers, motivations of dragons. It's just like a deep dive into dragons. And if it's a rehash of that, I'm kind of totally okay with that, because that book was so much fun to read and use.
Well, and that's what brings me to our main topic for today, because not specifically about dragons. In fact, we may do a separate episode to dig into those old dragon ecology books, because there's a couple of them and they're great. Like Matt says, they're so much fun. But it made me think about monster ecology in general. Think about what would it mean to have a real monster ecology book in the way of the Draconomicon, and if that is indeed what Fizban's Treasury of Dragons is. That would be pretty cool. I think these are always fun. So I thought it would be good for us to talk about, from a world building perspective, monster ecology, because I don't think we've talked about this yet, Matt. I think we've touched on it, and I think when we were talking about dungeons, we have covered it very vaguely, but I think we should talk in greater detail about monster ecology. And
yeah,
I have. Go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, if you're unfamiliar with this topic, what we mean is kind of the in the monster manual or in the Dungeon Master's Guide, there's kind of, at least in 5th edition, brief discussions of what the life cycle, the biology or habits of different creatures, intelligent or otherwise. Back in the day, there used to be long articles on this. Some of the books have kind of touched on this, right? Volo's Guide to Monster has short chapters about various creatures that are kind of ecologist-ish articles. But this can be a really good thing to dive into when you're doing your world building.
They come close, but none of the 5th edition books really get deep. And there's to me, there's good and bad sides to this. I think getting too focused on monster ecology can rob the monsters of some of their magic, some of their excitement, some of the interests, and also risk over-explaining your world, which is as much of a problem as under-explaining it is. But I like the idea of monster ecology, and I think it's important for world builders and for DMs to consider. We talked about a few episodes ago how the creators of Ravenloft encountered a vampire in a dungeon, and they were all excited to find out, why is this vampire in a dungeon? And it was just a vampire in a dungeon. And that inspired them to create Ravenloft, a setting where, vampires existed and had a reason to be, and there was, a story and a setting that supported that. And so I think it is important to consider where your monsters come from and why they're there. And so we're going to talk about that some. But when it comes to D&D, there's a very clear starting point for monster ecology. And it is, and I have a treat for you.
Oh,
and
okay.
It comes from, now, I'm not saying that nobody had ever considered it before this, which is not true, because many people had been doing this in other settings for a while, but in Dungeons and Dragons, the real key starting point is in the April 1983 edition of Dragon Magazine.
Ooh, I get a Dragon Magazine as a treat. I'm
Dragon
so
number 72, which included this article, which is a reprint from a UK trade publication called The Ecology of the Piercer, by Chris Elliott and Richard Edwards. And it's short, so I'm going to read it in its entirety.
Okay, this is great. I mean, the Piercer is one of those, clearly designed with the end point in mind monsters that doesn't make any fucking sense.
That's what's funny about this one. And the Piercer...
the Cloaker, it's all right, I came up with a monster that's really annoying.
The Piercer's clearly designed to make dungeon crawling unpleasant and to punish careless adventurers. It does not make any sense except to make your players unhappy. So it's funny. It's interesting. It's of course a little tongue in cheek that they would choose this. But here's The Ecology of the Piercer by Chris Elliott and Richard Edwards. Which begins, being the text of an address given to the Wizards Guild of Cabring by the wizard Pyrex, shortly before his unfortunate demise. Brothers and sisters in the arcane arts, there can be few here tonight who, at some time in the course of an expedition underground, have not had to leap out of the way of a piercer, launching itself from its roost high in the shadows above. If the piercer misses, it is usually smeared across the cavern floor. If it hits, it often does so with deadly accuracy. Because of these aspects of its existence, few people have any real idea of the creature's true nature or life cycle. For instance, in the bestiary of Zygag, the sage has this to say about the piercer. Ye piercer doth look like unto a
hey, this is
stalactite.
not to interrupt here, but just a really great way to make sure your article gets published in Dragon is, have a quote from Gary Gygax's stand-in character.
Yes, absolutely. This is a real wink and a nod
round
here.
nosing.
Yeah. Ye piercer doth look like unto a stalactite, and hangeth from the roof of caves and caverns. Unto the height of a man, and thicker than a man's thigh do they grow, and in groups do they hang. If a creature doth pass beneath them, they will by its heat and noise perceive it, and fall upon it to kill and devour it, though in any other way they move but exceedingly slow. Another side note, don't bother with yield speak in any of your games. It will sound stilted and bad, and nobody will appreciate it, and just skip it, in my opinion. So back to the address by the wizard Pyrex.
Okay.
Hardly
yes.
pushing back the frontiers of scholarly analysis, I think you would agree. Unanswered therein are such questions as, how does it move? How does it feed? How, if it attacks only by sensing noise and heat, can it be so deadly accurate? And how, once it has impaled its prey, does it regain its lofty perch? Well, we now have the answers. After much careful and often dangerous research and observation, I have established the life cycle of this remarkable animal, which I shall now relate while a number of my assistants illustrate with conjured images. The piercer is a mollusk, hatched from an egg the size of a hen's,
Okay.
laid in the clutches of 6 or 8 in crevices on cavern walls and floors.
Wait, I can see that now. Right? There are those mollusks with the little spiral shells. Okay.
There's an
dungeon
illustration
mollusk.
which we will include in the show notes, which is gross and bad, but it's funny. It looks.
Oh, Rob, this illustration feels like it's from like a 8th grade biology
looks like it's from your. It
textbook
looks like
about
it's from your sex ed handbook.
sex ed.
Yeah,
There's a little. I hate to. I'm describing this as fallopian.
it's very it's extremely sexually suggestive. Probably not intentionally. It just looks like that. When first hatched, it resembles a slug with a rather more pointed tail than usual, but soon its abrasive tongue is scouring from the walls not only the fungi in which the young feed, but grit and sand. Gradually, the grit and sand are secreted into a rocky shell around its body, growing from a thin, sturdy point to a cone, as thick around as a man's thigh as it grows. When the piercer is about a foot long, it develops the distinctive adult oculars or eye stalks, which can be extended from the shell to point back along it. After slowly making its way to the roof of a cave, the adult piercer hangs there by its sucker foot, oculars alertly canted, waiting for its prey. Great patience is required, but when a creature passes immediately underneath it, down it plummets with fearful accuracy. And normally, its rocky shell will penetrate most hides, and it makes a kill. What then, I hear you ask? How does it feed on its prey, and how does it surmount the more immediate problem of being stuck bolt upright in a skewered orc? Fair questions indeed. What in fact
What's
happens...
the point? How's it gonna not immediately be killed?
What in fact happens is that the piercer must briefly leave its protective covering and eat its prey while clear of the shell. Now is when it's at its most vulnerable, save for when it mates. Whenever possible, it prefers to partially extrude itself from its victim, overbalance, and then pull its shell clear. This done, it can feast at leisure on the corpse before crawling back to the roof to begin again the long wait. From time to time, 2 piercers will make their way to the cavern floor where they perform a slow and intricate courtship, tracing labyrinthine tales in the dust. At the end of this ritual, they emerge briefly from their shells to consummate their union, then laboriously return to their rocky roosts.
I love imagining piercer coitus. Thanks.
In due course, another clutch of eggs is laid, and another generation of these remarkable gastropods emerges to continue the cycle. Fellow thaumaturges, I give you the piercer.
Bravo.
At this point, a rabbit was released and was promptly impaled by a small piercer previously unnoticed in the roof. Amid general uproar, the piercer was revealed to be an illusion, which was small consolation to the rabbit, but was generally agreed to be a stylish and highly professional finish to a fascinating address. And then there is an illustration of the piercer. So this is the first official Ecology article, which spawned dozens.
I have never
more.
read that, so thank you for sharing that, Rob. And what a great place for Ecology to start with, like the creature that makes one of the least amount of sense.
Absolutely,
from
no sense. Yeah,
biology standpoint. I mean,
How would this thing evolve?
But they did it.
What is its purpose? How does it eat? How does it reproduce? And this is a funny article, and it's compared to some relatively low effort. I like that it's written sort of in universe and in tongue in cheek, but it answers all of the critical questions, right? How does it reproduce? How does it feed? What sort of creature is it? What's its life cycle?
How does it react to its environment?
Right.
Yeah.
It's a little light on behavior, but that's okay. It's a creature that drops from the ceiling and kills people. So yeah, I think this is actually
so much this is why these articles matter, or like why thinking about this matters, right? Because, okay, you could hang a couple piercers in a hallway in a dungeon and some players get stabbed by them as they walk by and they're like, God damn it, now we're going to have to check the ceiling. Or in the room before, you'd have a bunch of, now we know what a juvenile piercer. And so there's, players see some slugs, crawling around on the walls, and they're developing these shells. And if players have skills in nature, dungeoneering, or whatever have you, they're like, oh, that's interesting. And if they can be rewarded for investigating those creatures and know, oh, there's piercers nearby, and they can check. And if they don't, well, then, it's kind of on them.
Right. They could notice trails in the dust. And if they have the right, if they have survival or nature, they could say, oh, wait, hang on. That's a piercer trail. We got to watch the ceiling. And it's and this is the whole, this is not, again, you do not need to do this to put monsters in your dungeon. Yeah. But
or in your world.
But it adds, like Matt just said, adds some depth and realism and verisimilitude.
Richness.
If your players encounter some owlbear spoor in the wild and they can recognize it, then they can know, oh, we may be encountering an owlbear somewhere up here. Or if they find, webs of a certain type of giant spider, right? Knowing very, and again, in just like very like general terms, how your monsters live and behave and reproduce adds a lot of richness. It also gives you, if your players ask difficult questions or if they want to know what's going on, it gives you something to say and helps you understand sort of like what they're encountering. If they're like, hey, why is this cave full of awful monsters? You can be like, well, I'm so glad you asked. This is a piercer spawning ground. Yeah.
Here's some fake academic articles on it written in the A's. Yeah, no, if we're thinking about what's the purpose of ecology, right? In world building, it's to make your world rich, right? To give it texture, pores, right? And I think you can, in general, and this is totally fine, sort of start off at the like basic tier, which is not thinking about this at all, which is fine, right? If you don't have time to do this, that's fine. You just have monsters, you have creatures, you have intelligent monsters, you have non-intelligent, and you just place them around your adventure site or your world, and that's fine. What we're saying is, if you're thinking about ecology, you're moving up to sort of the next tier of that kind of world building, where you're at least considering this at some level.
Yeah, and I do think this is sort of important to think about. I find myself in my own games coming up with questions, especially if I'm adapting a module or running one that somebody else wrote, and there's something that just doesn't really seem to have a good reason for being there. I either have to come up with one or adjust it. This is my own brain problem that I have. This may not bother you at all, but it does sort of, it helps you make sense of the world that you're building and the game that you're running. I was thinking about this with dragons, right? We talked about, this came to me because, and again, I hope that Zifnab's Treasury of Dragons is an ecology, because that's always fun, and we'll talk about the Draconomicon at some point. But, dragons are interesting for this perspective, right? A dragon is a large, flying, fire-breathing reptile. It's
magical. It lives thousands of years.
Mystical, and I promise you will break your brain trying to make this make sense from, like, an ecological perspective. But you should still... It's still helpful to think about it, right? So, like,
on that point, right? It's like, you don't have to, there's like a whole spectrum, right? Maybe if you're running a hard sci-fi game, right? You might want to build out your world completely logically, like from ecology. But if you're running a fantasy game, right? You might want to do that with some things, but other things you're going to have to say, well, it's magic. But you can still think about how that monster interacts and behaves and influences the world.
Yeah, a great example of this is in The Empire Strikes Back. The Millennium Falcon lands on an asteroid, and it turns out that they're inside a giant fucking space worm. Now,
space worm.
One wonders, how does a creature that large survive in space? What does it eat? Does it wait for Millennium Falcons to land in its mouth? Like, is that the only form of sustenance that it has? And
well, it has the symbiotic Minox, I guess. Maybe.
What do they eat aside from, again, future writers in the Star Wars universe have attempted to explain this, much like they tried to explain how the Millennium Falcon can make a Kessel Run in less than however many parsecs, even though a parsec is a unit of distance and not time, because they tried very hard to make sense of something that made no sense because George Lucas thought it would be cool. And and this is a thing
now you're reminding me that in the film Solo, there's also a space kraken.
That's right. I forgot it. Oh man,
I completely forgot about that.
Completely forgot.
How does that exist?
Space kraken.
Well, it doesn't matter.
Anyway, the point is,
the answer to the space worm is whatever.
I don't know. It eats rocks. Whatever. The point is, if it's a hard sci-fi campaign, you may not want to put like a giant space worm without considering like what the space worm eats. But you don't need to know like everything about a dragon. But something's worth. I like to use dragons when thinking about ecology because they're particularly difficult, and other fantasy properties have done interesting things with this. So the Dragon Riders of Pern was a very actually like high science fantasy hard sci-fi version of this, where the dragons were, sorry, don't get mad at me because I love these books but I don't remember them very well, but I think they were genetically engineered and they flew around to burn
the
thread
threads,
which fell from the horrible moon. But the point is, they had a whole ecology, they had a whole life cycle. Everything about them was understood. And then this is not well explored, but in Game of Thrones, as Daenerys' dragons get bigger, it becomes an increasingly large problem because they eat livestock and it's hard to keep them fed. And I think at one point they maybe kill some people. This is never really explored in the show because the show went off the rails before ever answering any difficult questions. But this is something worth considering, right? So like a dragon is huge. The largest carnivore on planet Earth is a sperm whale. Sperm whale has to eat 2,000 pounds of fish or something like that every day to keep swimming. So
same.
Big mood. So, a dragon's a lizard, maybe it's reptilian, maybe it's warm-blooded, maybe it's cold-blooded. How much does it need to eat? Is it, constantly consuming whole herds of cattle just to keep moving, or does it somehow otherwise gain nourishment?
Does it slumber? Do as Charlie Day would say, dragons, do they eat gold?
Right.
Do they eat treasure? They might.
Does it hibernate? Right. Does it draw sustenance from sort of the magic in the air? Think about these things, because
and this is fun, right? Because it's like, if you have a red dragon on top of a mountain, right, and you're building out a campaign, like how far is the influence of that dragon felt, right? What's
its territory?
Yeah. Adventures are interesting when like they're seeded ahead of time, right? And that gets like to the second point of like why ecology is useful is if you're doing a certain type of world building, especially the type where you're starting small and building out, it helps and gives you options for like logical or at least interesting next steps, right? What's beyond the next mountain range? What's beyond the next hill? What's in the next hex? What's over in the next town?
Right.
Ecology can help you answer that.
And, looking into this and trying to do comparisons can be helpful for, again, building out the world. Sperm whale's got to eat a lot. Polar bear only needs to kill a seal every week, to maintain body weight, right? So maybe a dragon is more like a polar bear. Maybe it takes down a half dozen cows or an elephant or something, every week, and then it slumbers for a month or so, or maybe it has some other way. But you should at least consider what it needs to survive if you're placing it importantly in an adventure. And I think this is, I often warn, because I'm guilty of this, world builders against getting too in the details and focusing way too much on things, because you're still trying to do this to build a world or tell a story. So you don't want to spend a ton of time, examining the digestive tract of every monster that you're going to place in your adventure. But you should think about it. And a great example of this, in my opinion, is, of course, probably the best example is The Witcher, where every monster has a like deeply considered ecology, which is sometimes really like weirdly magical. But there's always like every monster wants something, came from somewhere, has a specific way to be defeated, and is trying to accomplish something. It has
Right,
a
it's
motivation.
a pattern of behavior
Yeah.
that could be understood,
Right.
right? Maybe only with great difficulty and expertise, but yeah.
But there's always, right, all of them they all have like a pattern of behavior, or a pattern of how they interact with the world, and often it's very bizarre, right? But there's always a reasoning behind it, right? They always want something. And this is good advice for your villains and your monsters, but also your NPCs, really anything. What do they want, right? What are they trying to accomplish? Does an owlbear want to feed? Is it angry because somebody stole its owlbear cub? You know, why does a rust monster
Or chick,
chick? Why does it chickub? Why does a rust monster hate metal things?
Well, it eats them.
It eats them, right?
Tasty, right? Yeah, and I mean, this can get you, some distance, right? Not just with like unintelligent monsters, but like with intelligent ones too, right? What does a city look like that has been infiltrated by two doppelgangers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are they in a war with each other? Are they working together, right? How does the city behave differently when there's, for example, a doppelganger that is 5 different people throughout town? But, let's say you take something like, I don't know, like a Medusa or something that's like highly magical, highly unusual, you might, you could build it ecologically, or you could have a really enchanting fairy tale-ish reason for it, right? Is this a cursed person that's a Medusa, right? Or is this, a creature put here by the gods for some reason?
Yeah. And I think this is a great, again, just like a little bit of consideration about either for intelligent or unintelligent monsters, how they relate to their environment, what they're trying to accomplish. Does Medusa turn people to stone for a particular reason, or is that a just unfortunate side effect of the magical curse, right? In the case of, you don't need to figure out like why a beholder evolved a bunch of different eye stalks, but now that it's got a bunch of different eye stalks, how does that impact its behavior? How does it use that to, how does it relate to other beholders or other creatures? Beholders are a particularly fun one because in the like official D&D lore, and I think you can get this in like the Aberration source book from 3E and in some of the Spelljammer they went
stuff.
into beholders in one of the recent books, one of the 5E books. They had a whole beholders section, right?
Oh yeah, that's right. They did. And it's beholders are like they're constantly evolving and mutating, and they hate all other beholders that aren't from like the same genetic line. And they have their disintegrate rays let them like carve out these massive dungeons and float up and down things. So if there's a beholder in your dungeon, it's going to have a lot of up and down tubes.
Right.
That might be hard for your players to travel, right? Thinking about how monsters affect the environment is super interesting. Even with something like a dragon, right? If your players, if there's a magical forest that has a green dragon, a dragon that likes forests, maybe the forest is in fact generations of dragons have basically cultivated in a way this forest, so it's the perfect breeding ground for the dragon's favorite prey, right? There's just the right kinds and amount of trees and perches, and like there's whole flocks of hippogriffs and griffins that it hunts, and it basically it's turned it into a perfect hunting ground for its generational kin.
And that makes sense to me. And given that dragons are highly intelligent creatures, one must imagine that when they are creating these layers, that they are also considering food source and environment. And I like to think, or I like to imagine for my dragons, that they are deliberately influencing the environment, creating areas where they can hunt and hide and feed. And if you're, approaching a dragon in its lair, it's probably impacted the environment around that layer for perhaps dozens or hundreds of miles, depending on what its range is. That would make sense to me. That may be complicated. And this gets to one of the reasons why a more concrete reason to do this, and that's it helps you run more interesting encounters as well, right? Matt just mentioned beholders, right? They float, they've got disintegration rays, they can carve out their own dungeons, they can move up and down in three-dimensional space, right? A beholder is not going to float 5 feet off the ground and engage a party of adventurers, not if it can help it. A dragon is not going to land and, fight in a enclosed space unless it is forced to do so. I love owlbears. I'm going to keep bringing up owlbears. An owlbear may not fight to the death, because it's an owlbear. It's not a savage, ravenous beast unless it's been driven to a frenzy or you're between it and its chick cub, right? Think about how it helps you create more realistic encounters, right?
Yeah. On the granular level, that works very, very well for how you do your world building, right?
I feel the rage and I just can't hold it. It's scratching on the walls, in the closet and the halls. It comes awake and I can't control it. Hiding under the bed, in my body and my head. Why won't somebody come and save me from this? Make it end. I feel it deep within, it's just beneath the skin. I must confess that I feel like a monster. I hate what I've become, the nightmare's just begun. I must confess that I feel like a monster. I feel like a monster. I feel like a monster.
Other topics for thinking about ecology, or should we do some specifics?
Some
examples.
We've talked about. Some things I think you should think about. Right, there's obviously a lot here, and there's been dozens of these ecology articles, so you don't have to start from scratch. I guess is the thing is that if you are building something, creating a world, or just trying to flesh out your dungeon, you can just go back through, search for these articles, or search through one of the many D&D Reddits to see if anybody has written about this.
But sometimes the monster manuals do a good enough job that give you enough to build off.
It's
Not
usually
always.
thin, but sometimes they'll include something. But it just helps, and you don't need to spend a lot of time on it, and it can add some depth to your game. And you can also, if you're building your own monster, or if you're placing your monsters and you want to know why there's a colony of giant spiders, or if you want to understand what the pack of blink dogs is doing there, this can help you build a more interesting setting, a more interesting encounter. It is something I would place at this is something I'm always passively considering, so I don't want to say don't spend a lot of time on it, but it isn't something that you should place at the sort of top of your world building checklist. There are a lot of things that the players are going to encounter and interact with that you need to have fully established before you start worrying about the life cycle of the monsters that you place in front of them. But I think that it's something that's worth considering as you go down the line. It's something that's especially once you start once I guess your players start adventuring more, whether or not they're hex crawling or dungeon delving, just having a vague idea of how things got there and what they want is a useful metric to have. This is one thing that I sort of don't like about random encounter tables is even when they're sort of tied to a biome, which they are more often, the randomness just feels like it sort of doesn't, it works against trying to understand why any given creature or encounter exists in a space,
Sure. In defense of a random encounter table, you could, more or less use them like I do to say, what is possible here, right? And modify it as you see fit, right?
True.
The random encounter table for Temperate Hills tells us, what is the likelihood of these types of creatures being here. And of course, you can still use it as like, well, I need something here. Which one is it going to be? Okay, well, now that this is here, what else should be nearby, right? Now that a rock is here, I know that there should be some herds of bamfs, nearby.
Ecology kind of falls apart also with certain things like the infinite horde of demons in the abyss or whatever, right? They're not if you're trying to build out a life cycle for something like that, you're gonna go nuts. Though a limited
or so this is, I think my next point is like, you can also have, and you don't have to do this, but you can also have a magical ecology, right? I think the abyss is a perfect example of this, right? In that human souls end up in the abyss, and then souls are then, either transformed into like some form of currency or mutated into the lowest level demon, right? And that these demons have this sort of chance to rise to a greater demon. And then the greater demons have this sort of thing to do. And when the greater demons are killed, their like soul stuff becomes part of the plane. So you don't have to do a magical ecology for your crazy worlds, but I prefer to, right? And the abyss has, at least according to like Planescape lore, has that kind of magical ecology. And you can work that out if you want your magical creatures and enchantments and stuff to be something that players can explore, solve, or understand. Like, why was this person cursed into becoming a Medusa, right? Or why do the Feywild gates connect the way they do, right? You could give it a magical ecology, right? Breaking the rules of normal ecology. This works for like crazy out there sci-fi too, right? But you can still add some checks and reasons, and these can be things that drive your either world building or your plot situation creation.
Sorry, this is a great point, and I agree with Matt on this. I've been focused very much on a roughly natural ecology, but if we're talking about what we want is for your creatures, your monsters to have a purpose, a direction, right? That does not have to be, or even like, a life cycle. That does not have to be eat, sleep, fuck, die. It can be, rise through the ranks of hell, or it can be, gather souls, or it can be whatever it is that Modrons do when they're in Mechanus, whatever sort of like hierarchy or motivation that they have.
I think they're mining Bitcoin. They're solving useless math equations. Modron Bitcoin mine. Let's make it happen, people.
Oh, God. Oh, I just got a really good idea for... never mind. Original idea, do not steal.
Do not...
Yeah, so, but Matt makes a great point here.
Modrons aren't real, Rob. You can't use them to mine Bitcoin. Sorry.
Matt
but an interesting challenge to your world would be that Modrons are solving... They're like trying to solve every math equation. Ever. Right? And they're run out of space on their infinite plane. Don't ask me how that works. It's high-level math. And so they're invading the material world to turn it into these useless clockwork. Why are you solving these equations? Well, we need to solve them. We're mining
they're mining
they're terraforming the material plane to do blockchain.
That would be good. I think Modrons are a great, like, if not villain, like opponent that are very rarely used, just because they're not evil. So I don't think they end up in as a lot of, but I think they would and could be a really like great focal point for any number of like plane spanning campaign. Anyway, so that's monster ecology. There's obviously like a lot more to be said about it, but I think that it's interesting because a lot of work has been done here, and some people have put a lot of...
That's the important point, is other people have done so much of this. Rob and I are not sitting around, doing a page of notes for every creature we have. We're stealing whatever someone else has written in one of our mini source books that has already been done. Just taking what we like,
Sometimes I like to put my own unique spin on it, but in 9 times out of 10, somebody has already done a good job of writing up a monster ecology for almost every monster in the monster manual, and sometimes more than one if you want to pick and choose. And you have to dig for these sometimes because they're not in the usually what's in the main books is pretty thin so far. Again, we'll see what's in Fizban's Treasury of Dragons, but you can still find them almost all for free online, and you don't have to start from scratch and start figuring out your own monster ecologies. And in fact, you shouldn't. If you're designing your own monsters, think about
or steal a monster ecology that's already written up,
right?
That you like.
In fact, even if you are designing your own monsters, I would just model or borrow a lot from one that already exists. Again, this is our rule for just about everything: is borrow as much as you possibly can. But yeah, that's exactly the point. All of this has been done for you by grognards going back to the 80s. This Piercer article was written before I was born. I mean, it's incredible how much there is out there that you can just draw from. Also, bring back the Piercer. Where's the Piercer? Put that back in the monster manual. Let's get some awful pointy stalactites.
We love our Piercers. We love our Cloakers, these dungeon monsters that don't make a lot of sense. Yeah. But again, it's just, it helps you give reasons why and then add more nodes to help present your players with sort of open-ended situations that they confront, avoid, solve, deal with in their own way, right? Undead are a great example of this, right? If you're thinking about, why is this undead here? Why is this a vampire and not a mummy? Why are there ghouls here and not zombies, right? Again, the answer might be because it's the appropriate challenge level for your players. But, if you have a specific type of curse or negative energy or, people killed in a certain way or raised by a certain school of necromancers, right? You see how you're building out your stories and hopefully connecting them to whatever else you want to do with your adventure.
And this rewards players, or provides a reward for players, right? If they encounter a bunch of raised zombies or skeletons, and they keep encountering them, then they may say, oh, there's a necromancer nearby. Or if more obviously they encounter a bunch of vampire spawn, then they will naturally conclude, oh no, we're dealing with a vampire. And then when they inevitably find that vampire, they'll be like, aha, we solved this problem. And it can be more, this is also this is part of the delight of The Witcher, right? Is, Geralt will find some hideous monster and then determine what the real cause behind it is, or what's what's driving it to behave a certain way.
Oh wait, it's humans.
Yes,
humans
it's always bad people, by the way. It's always humans. And this is, again, what is wonderful about The Witcher is it's got a very one note grim view of humanity, but I never get tired of it.
It's also a good way to even focus, especially for parties or groups of players who are new to the game or don't have a lot of intrinsic motivation, right? Discovering that the hill giants tend to collect garbage in their bags and rotting meat and large but round rocks, as opposed to fire giants who have all this magical treasure. Oh, well, that will help us decide what decision we're going to make.
Right.
Who we're going to go after or where we're going to adventure.
We've alluded to this, I think, but there's lots of ways to motivate your players. Of course, there's experience and gold, the two primary motivators, but players also enjoy, of course, just the act of playing or role playing, and they also enjoy figuring things out, and they also enjoy getting useful or interesting information and having even just a bit of ecology. If the players want to know, well, why do these hill giants have these sacks of trash? Or why does this color dragon like this particular environment? Or why does the rust monster hate my sword so much? These are things that it is, if they can figure it out either through checks or just learning things, it's rewarding to them. And it's a good, all of this makes your world feel more alive, which makes it easy easier and more fun for you to run, and easier and more fun for your players to inhabit.
What about some concrete examples from either adventures we are running right now or campaigns or worlds we're building for future campaigns? Could we do like 5 minutes each on that?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a good question. As you all know, one of my favorite settings that I ran was Thunder on the Steppe, which was based on a very thinly veiled Mongol empire. And I've been trying to revisit that. But one thing I have been thinking about a lot as I've been working on it is that I want it to be weirder going forward. That it was too... My tastes have become
too historical one for one.
Yes, and my tastes have become more unconventional in the intervening years, and
you're harder to satiate.
And I wanted to distinguish it. It was a little bit too on the nose. It was a little bit too historical, a little bit too Guy Gavriel K, which is great, but for D&D, we want to get a little bit bolder, and so I have been trying to build a setting that includes large numbers of flying mounts, and that it requires sort of flying mounts to navigate, a little bit like Dragon Riders of Pern, right? That involves perhaps floating islands and
sexual awakening as you bond with your flying mount. I'm here for it.
Tall cliffs, but I've been thinking a lot about birds and eagles and things, hippogriffs and griffins, and right, like what...
you want to go toe-to-toe on bird ecology? Any day, I'm there. Let's go. Okay.
What they eat, what they, what would need to exist to sustain, like, flocks of hippogriffs or large numbers of giant eagles. I'm always thinking about the giant eagles because of Lord of the Rings, like, how much do they eat? Where do they roost? That sort of thing. And, it just means that I'm still figuring it out, but birds, they also, as birds get larger, their tiny like bird bones become more fragile. So do I need to consider
bird
I
bones?
don't
I'm gonna tell you don't need to think about bird bones.
I don't, but it is something that keeps coming back to me. But yeah,
the important thing with ecology is knowing when to rescue yourself,
not knowing when to stop. Right. Here's a tip: if you start to worry too much about whether or not a large creature can stand up, you've gone too far. Just enjoy having a big creature. Don't worry about the physics of it too much. Just it's a giant ant. Just be happy that it's a giant ant. Don't ask yourself whether or not its giant ant legs will be able to support its giant ant body and go on with life.
And giant ants, like maybe, for example, there are large colonies of things like giant insects, which sustain large populations of hippogriffs or griffins or something. Right. A bird-like creature that eats insects that, or giant sparrows or giant owls or whatever, that no one else really wants to eat a giant ant. But
well, and what it do. What it made me realize is that it needed to be a kind of it needs to be a kind of what's the zone in the Marvel comics which is full of dinosaurs and
like Hollow Earth.
Yeah, it needed to be
adventure
savage island? Something yeah. Savage yeah. Earth. Anyway, I'm. The point is that it needs to be a particularly rich and lush world. Maybe there are herds of mammoth for giant eagles and hippogriffs to descend on, and
you're gonna need a rock at least to eat a mammoth.
Oh yeah, that's true.
The griffin can't eat a
mammoth. Griffin can't carry away a mammoth.
All right, we're gonna fight if you think a griffin can eat
a
mammoth.
No. But rocks is a good point, actually.
All right.
This world obviously also has to include a rock, which can carry away a mammoth, but
right, and that's the fun thing. You're like, all right, flocks of large amounts of giant birds. Maybe they need some predators. That's what maybe
rocks
dragons
hunt them,
or rocks,
dragons hunt them. Yeah, exactly. This is about as far as I've gotten, but it made me realize that if I was going to have, if you want large numbers of big animals, right, big carnivorous animals, and or most birds of prey, I guess obviously if they're going to be birds of prey, of course they have to be carnivorous, right? You're going to need prey animals, and what does that look like? herds of wildebeest or whatever, large roaming pack animals for them to feed on. Giant ants is funny though. Giant ants would be interesting. Maybe they also eat like large arthropods. Ooh, what if they eat phormians? That would be great. Sorry. Ooh. What if hippogriffs and giant eagles are always hunting phormians, and phormians
are like a great civilization to put somewhere because they're kind of like Modron's light, right?
Yes. Sorry, I actually love phormians for the same reason.
They're put some
Modron's
phormians in Thunder on the Steppe.
Yeah,
and they're easily preyed on, and maybe they don't care as much. They have that hive mind.
They have the hive mind, but also they're having to be on the lookout for that. This is a great example, by the way.
Rob, I also this reminded me a couple weeks ago. We have a lot of bats in Houston.
Ooh, yeah.
At the exit of a bat colony, I saw 2 herons post up in a tree where like bats were swarming out, and they were fucking eating bats or trying to eat bats, like
trying to catch them as they were going out.
Right, and that makes sense. I mean, they're the size of like a frog or something. They're small bats, and I was like, fucking herons eating bats. Anyway, that was one of the coolest things I've seen.
That's very cool. This is a great example, though. Like, just by trying to think through this question, I feel like I've come up with a bunch of really neat ideas that I hadn't considered already. And again, there's a risk here with all world building that you get like way too in your own head and end up, obsessing over things that don't matter. But spending a little bit of time thinking about this can be really valuable. Matt, what's something that you've been working on where this is relevant?
All right. Well, I wanted to start with like a high magic concept of something that you've probably seen before, but it'll only be in like a couple of my adventures. But, I got a space campaign, a magic space campaign. And I decided I want one world to be like heavily influenced by the energies of basically the Feywild or the first world, like just things grow too much. And so insert the cheesy bad line read from the Phantom Menace. The whole planet is a giant city. The whole planet is a giant forest, right? Where, the tops of the trees like reach into the thin upper atmosphere, and the bottom is like a lightless, kind of nightmarish wood and decayed
like
dungeon.
Kashyyyk, right? In Star Wars.
I think like Kashyyyk. I don't know. I don't.
Oh, sorry.
I remember
like
there was
in
being
one
swamps.
of the versions of Kashyyyk in Star Wars, because they're always. But yeah, I think one of them had like a deep, like dark forest floor. Sorry, I'm already excited about this. This is a great. It's a great planet idea.
This is a great, loose sci-fi world building idea.
Yes.
Okay, how do trees the size of continents stand up? It doesn't fucking matter. But
doesn't matter.
We can build out from this premise of like, oh, there are these, at the bottom is where, the race of Grippleys live with their like low light vision and their ability to jump from tree to tree. And one of the reasons they're such good at like stealth and hunting is because the things at the bottom come up to hunt the Grippleys. And maybe the Grippleys lived higher up, but they were pushed down by the elves who live in this like realm of light and beauty and trees, and they've got lots of flying mounts. Okay, what lives in the middle? Anyway, so that's what I was sort of working on.
Oh yeah, I like that.
Any...
No, I think that's great. Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, it's a little bit like almost too on the nose, but like, have a literal like hierarchy where like the elves live in the canopy and they have beautiful, rope bridges and magnificently carved tree houses, and then below them live I don't know, the Aarakocra or something, who used to be canopy dwellers, but they were driven down by the elves who wanted to be closer to the sun, and so they inhabit the middle area. And then you get deep and you find the Gripply, and then maybe there's something even deeper than the Gripply, some race of horrifying creatures that is always trying to come up. And this would be great because then you could sort of like rewrite the Gripply as sort of a martial survivalist race, constantly at war with the creatures from below, on okay terms with the races that live above, but resent them for,
If you have a race that like has the, bonus to diplomacy or the persuasion skill, there's maybe your reason why they have it. we've got the largest trees support small continents and lakes. The uppermost canopies are hardened against near vacuum. No one has ever made it to the legendary forest floor of Torak. The oceans of mists are down there, which are incredibly dangerous. Maybe the people there have developed trees that can launch into space. Magic trees.
Yeah. Tree ships.
Tree ships are awesome, right?
Tree ships are awesome. Yeah. No, I love that. That's a great, like, high magic sci-fi / high fantasy concept. I would play in that world. There's tons to work with there.
I think one of my final things is what I really love for doing this is you usually for campaigns you're running got to take it down to a smaller scale, but books like Stars Without Number by Kevin Crawford or other sci-fi source books that like have planets with like crazy ecologies are often really good inspiration for either a really cool out there sci-fi or a magical fantasy thing. Even if it's sci-fi, you can take some of the ideas and use it for fantasy. So I think those types of books that do like galaxy building, right, do this really well.
Yeah. Science fiction is a great place to dig for this if you're running a fantasy game, as you can borrow, but it's obviously a higher priority for a lot of science fiction games and science fiction properties, and there are tons of great books in this genre. Any final thoughts on Monster Ecology before we sign off?
No, I think all I would encourage dungeon masters who haven't dipped their toe here is, I think the best advice here is just try it and see if it helps you, right? And do it occasionally. Move from that I'm putting things out in my campaign because I don't know why to trying to make some logical, sci-fi, ecological, biological, fantastical, or fairy tale connections between different parts of your world. And that's all we're doing. And as long as you're keep thinking about that occasionally, you're doing better than 90% of dungeon masters.
That's absolutely right. Yeah, I would just say, think about this. Don't let it overwhelm you. And yeah, just use it to sort of enliven your world a bit. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. If you've got thoughts, questions, concerns, write us at dmandnone@gmail.com. Add us on Twitter at
Let us know what ecology tips you have.
That's right. And stay healthy, stay safe, and keep rolling them dice.
But what if I trip? What if I fall? Then am I the monster? Just let me know. And what if I sin? And what if I break it? Then am I the monster? Yeah. Just let me know. Yeah. I was 15 when the world put me on a pedestal. I had big dreams of doing shows and making memories. Made some bad moves trying to act cool, upset by their jealousy. Lifting me up.